Welcome to our talk. Amy and I are going to talk about cloud and containers and the challenge you see there. Before we get going though, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Vincent Partington. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at XebiaLabs. My background is in computer science. I finished in the middle of the 90s, which is a great time to finish and start working, because then I started building a Perl CGI script for websites, which is pretty horrible, but kind of fun to do. Luckily also Java came around the same time, so basically started building servlets, that kind of stuff. Rode the Java wave, joined Xebia, our parent company, in 2003. Did a lot of performance tuning, security audits, all that kind of stuff, and actually helped a number of companies set up deployment scripting. And that's kind of how XebiaLabs got started, because out of that, XL Deploy came, and then XL Release later on, and since then I've been at XebiaLabs.
I'm Amy Johnston. I'm product manager for XL Deploy. I've been with XebiaLabs for a little over 3 years. So I work together with Vincent to plan our cloud and container strategy and also work with the development team to actually turn it into reality.
So what we'll be talking about is actually about cloud and containers, obviously, and about how that's not so easy as you might think. Well, first of all, why are we even talking about this? Well, cloud is kind of obvious. It's just here to stay. This is one of the many graphs I found while looking for cloud adoption rates on the Googles. This is the yearly spending, and there's like a gazillion of these going up. That's pretty obvious. This has been going on for a long time, and of course this is SaaS and PaaS and all different kind of cloud spending. If you break it up per category, it's the same kind of graphs. Containers, on the other hand, are a newer thing. That they came kind of up 4 years ago. And we've seen them grow pretty fast in adoption. You might wonder, like, why do we take these things as one? Because they're different technologies, different kind of things. The reason we kind of lump together for the purpose of this talk is actually that we see the same kind of challenges both for cloud and for containers. The containers is more of a technical thing, influencing the way you deliver your software and how you deploy it. Cloud's more where do you run it. You can have cloud containers on-prem and containers in the cloud, so they're kind of orthogonal. But still, we see a lot of the same things coming back within both. Actually, a good example of containers becoming very popular is that we now have quite a few customers using containers in production. We spoke to one of our first customers last week, and they were doing 10 million in revenue a day over their containerized applications they were deploying with XL Deploy, which is only about 10% of the whole landscape, but still 10 million a day in revenue is a nice amount. And we have many more doing that. So what's the thing that we see kind of again and again in this world is basically the thing that comes back is that people think it's easy. You have Docker now, or I have AWS, and things will be easy. It will solve all my deployment woes, and I don't need to think about it. It's solved forever. That's not really the case. What we've kind of found ourselves and actually heard back from our existing customers and prospects. And basically, I'm going to talk you through this list of 8 different problems that we see, and then I'm going to be the negative or the pessimist, and Amy's going to tell you how we can solve these things in general and with our products. The first one is actually deployment in cloud environments or in container environments is harder than you might think. If you drink the Kool-Aid, a Docker deployment would just be Docker run my app. Poof, there's your container, and ta-da, it runs. And that works, and that's how the tutorial starts. But if you actually start asking, so how does it work in practice? Well, I need to set up my volumes, I need to set up my networks, I need to actually have a whole bunch of configuration options passed to our Docker command before it will actually run. And then Docker itself is actually kind of simplistic, because I don't want to run this thing in production. So I'll probably need Kubernetes, like Tom Laro was saying like an hour ago in this room. Something underneath that or on top of Docker to manage all of that. So that just doesn't work. And the same for cloud. You might think, well, just spin up a VM, ta-da, it all works. Well, if you look at the screenshot, this is our Azure plugin in action. You could say, this is all the stuff you need to do to get an Azure VM up and running. So this is creating resource groups, creating IP addresses, routing tables, network security. Networking is always kind of a pain in all these platforms. Getting all the networking set up properly before anything even runs. And this is IaaS cloud, but this comes back again and again. So then you say, well, I can just script this. And of course, in the the keynotes this morning, Tim and other people also referred already to scripting. The big problem with that, of course, is that you end up depending on the single resource. There's just one person that knows how to script Docker or AWS or Azure. It's a lot of fun to do. This is what I've been doing back in the day, scripting this kind of stuff. It's fun. You figure out how it works. But you end up depending on, it's not the cheapest person that's going to do it. You need somebody that has an expert on this technology. That person is not going to be with you forever, apart from being expensive. They get bored, because I've done Azure for like 6 months now. It's time to do something new. I'm going to script something else. And of course, they could also get run over by a bus. That's the worst case scenario. Well, except if they're expensive. No, never mind. But so that's one of the problems. And the reason is, it's kind of like that bridge story that Tim was telling. Like, you don't just build these scripts once. That's what I thought 10 years ago. You build them once, my job is done, I move on as a consultant. But it would always get called back in to update the scripts for new versions of, back then, WebLogic or WebSphere. And the same actually in the cloud and container world. Because these platforms evolve, which is what we want them to do. We want new features in those platforms. Like Docker Swarm mode came out last year, which is one of these older version APIs. Then you want to update your scripts to actually deploy Swarm services, because that's actually a lot nicer than deploying single containers. Azure changed their deployment model from the classic model to the resource manager model. AWS changed the length of resource IDs. There's tons of these examples out there of these things just needing constant attention and nurturing to keep them up to date. While all that's going on, there's still all the old stuff going on. And Gene Kim actually had a cool example of that. It was the COBOL app, 3 letters, CSG, the printer application thing, where they had COBOL, desktop apps, Java legacy, and probably mobile apps and container apps all together making up that whole application landscape. And that's what we see at all of our users also. That at the same, I was telling you about this customer of ours having 10 million a day revenue over their container apps. That was just, I don't know, 5 or 10% of their whole landscape. A lot of it's still in Tomcat, some of it even in mainframe. And it's traditional IT is going down, but not at a kind of a very impressive rate. It will be around for a while. And I wonder if it's going to go that way or that way. We'll find out in 10 years. But at the same time, now I broke it. Oh no. Yeah. At the same time, it's actually new stuff is appearing faster and faster. And that's actually the exciting stuff for us. And if you're actually working on this stuff, and if you're scripting this, it's even more fun. Because when cloud, there was like a period of about 10 years when it was just WebSphere, WebLogic, and then kind of JBoss came around, which is okay, kind of the same thing but nicer. And then EAS came, and then containers came, and or PaaS, and then containers, and now they're serverless. It's just going faster and faster. So you basically end up having to support this huge stack of technologies. It just gets to be more and more. And here, this is the Gartner hype cycle. EAS is down here, and then there's PaaS is here. Containers are somewhere up here. Container management function PaaS is here, which is, no, where is it? Serverless platforms are over there. So this is actually cool new stuff. It's coming up here, so it will take a while to go up there and then down there, 2 to 5 years, according to Gartner. I'm excited to find out what's going to be the next one coming up here, but we'll know. And then another thing actually that we see, and that's interesting, is that there's just more and more applications. And Gene Kim also mentioned it. There's more deployments, more applications, more environments, and more dependencies. And I was talking about the Kool-Aid in the beginning, the microservice Kool-Aid. Gene also they didn't actually mention microservices, I think, in the talk, but kind of alluding to it as architecture styles that would enable DevOps teams to go faster on their own. The whole story there is that all these microservices are independent and don't need each other, or don't depend on each other, can just evolve. That's not really true if you look at these things. This is known as the Netflix Death Star. This is the dependency graph of all the microservices within Netflix, and that's the same for Twitter, and this is for Halo. These things need to be managed. You can't just upgrade one of them and then expect it to work, because it needs a certain version, minimum version. And the idea is, of course, that I can upgrade that one first and then that one. They shouldn't be tied too closely, but I'm going to have to manage these dependencies and get this overview. Then there's something that actually kind of think is a little overlooked in the whole space, is configuration. It's actually, we think it's important, and that's actually, every technology has its own way to manage configuration. So .NET has ini files, Java has property files and deployment descriptors. In the container world or the microservices, you'd have console and etcd, those kind of things to store configuration. Every technology stack has its own way to get it configured. But you need to make sure that you manage that configuration as a whole over all of your stacks so that you know what's running where and what's actually happening with those configurations. And then last but not least, as this is all going on, you'll still need to be able to support all the boring enterprise requirements of security, auditing, reporting, make sure that while you're doing all of this, you still are in control of what's happening. So those are the 8 problems we see that we've heard of. And I've been the Debbie Downer. This is the Debbie Downer part of the story. I'll now hand it over to Amy, and she will talk about some of the solutions to this.
Thanks. I'll come around here. Yeah, so getting your software out in the world is not that easy, even if you're using the newest, coolest cloud and container technologies. But XL Deploy and XL Release, so the XL DevOps Platform, is designed to handle those challenges. So I'm going to go through 8 features of the platform that kind of address the challenges that Vincent was describing. So first up, Vincent's first point, I think probably our biggest point, is that deployment's not so simple. You want to think that it's Docker run app or AWS up, but it's more complicated than that. So the unified deployment model is here to make that less complicated. So what the unified deployment model does is it allows XL Deploy to automatically generate deployment plans. So you're not designing a deployment workflow each time you want to get something out there. You're not scripting out each step of that workflow. You're just, sorry, this thing was vibrating. You're just picking what you want to deploy and where you want to deploy it. And XL Deploy and UDM do the rest. So deployment becomes this thing that just works. It gets out of developers' way, and operations teams can rest assured that deployments are repeatable and standardized. So you don't have to rely on that Docker expert or that AWS guru who's vulnerable to being hit by the bus, or you're going to lose them to some other company or some other new technology. All of that knowledge lives inside XL Deploy. So you get repeatable deployments instead of one-off deployments that are not going to scale. So speaking of scalability, I'm sure we can't possibly say it enough times that scripting doesn't scale. But all of that stuff that you would script in the DevOps platform, that all lives in plugins. So you get out-of-the-box content for integrations, and you don't have to script that logic out yourself. So like Vincent mentioned, especially like the newer the technology is, the more likely its API is to change. So things change, they grow, evolve. Yeah, every company's probably aiming for backwards compatibility, but sometimes it's just not there. So we take care of that in our plugins. So we keep them up to date with the latest features that are available in these target technologies, and take a little bit of the pressure off of you to redo all of your deployment stuff just because you wanted to upgrade. So, like Vincent mentioned, all of this on-prem architecture and legacy applications, they're just not going away. So you need something that's going to work for all of the cool new next-gen cloud-native stuff, as well as the web spheres and the JBosses and all that. But with XL Deploy and XL Release, that's all just plugins. So you have one standardized way of doing your releases and doing your deployments, and the plugins take care of all the logic that's needed depending on what you're deploying and where you're going to deploy it. So we already have quite a few plugins for different cloud and container products like AWS and Docker and Azure. And we're constantly evaluating what's out there and figuring out what integrations we need to build. So that's something that we'd really like to hear from you. What you're looking at, what's on your roadmap, what kind of new products you're interested in, because that helps us prioritize, and then we can get support for these technologies out to you faster. But of course, it's not just about what you get out of the box from XebiaLabs. XL Deploy and XL Release both have a standard plugin mechanism, so you can extend any plugin that we provide, or you can just write your own. So if you're using something like Rocket or DigitalOcean, where we don't have a plugin yet, you can build that integration yourself. And that gives you some of the not so bad things about scripting, like you really get full control over how provisioning and deployment work, but that's all within the context of the unified deployment model. So even if you're writing your own custom integrations, you still get deployment plans that are repeatable and error-free. In fact, we have a customer in Europe that has been using XL Deploy for their own private cloud installation for, I think, well over a year now. So they just take the provisioning support that we have built in and have extended that for their own custom setup. So when we're talking about plugins and integrations on and all of that, we tend to talk about what you're deploying to or what you're releasing your software on. But it's also about the other side, all of the tool chains that you have to get your software out there. So you probably have some kind of set of tools that help your developers continuously integrate their code. And you probably have a tool chain that helps you continuously deliver that or even continuously deploy it to end users. So XL Deploy and XL Release are both designed to fit into that tool chain and to scale up as it scales up. So like Vincent mentioned, over time, you're just dealing with a growing number of applications, even more so if you decide to go the microservices route, and you're going to be dealing with more and more infrastructure, especially if you're using cloud. So you're going to have developers committing more often, builds are going to run more and more automated testing, and more deployments. And XL Deploy and XL Release scale up as the rest of your pipeline scales up. So if you have never seen the case studies on our website, if you check those out, then the theme that you'll see across all of them is that the XL DevOps platform helps people deliver stuff faster. And one of the reasons it does so is because it integrates with tools that you're probably already using now, like Jenkins and Maven, or at least that you're considering using in the future as you're growing in your DevOps journey. But it's not just about all of these technical integrations. It's also about having flexibility for your business requirements, because nobody goes from manual deployments and manual releases to everything fully automated overnight, right? It's a process. So in the case of XL Deploy, you can support both your legacy applications and your new cool applications at the same time. And for XL Release, you can have fully automated release processes, fully manual processes, or anything in between. And they can grow with you over time as you change your practices. So Vincent showed the Gartner hype cycle. And two of the up-and-coming trends are microservices and serverless architecture. And with those two trends specifically, we already anticipate that you're going to need bigger, better overviews of your application landscape. So if you are working with something like the Netflix Death Star of dependencies, then you have to have a way to get a handle on that. So something that's on our roadmap is building overviews that show you this kind of information. So what's deployed where are the dependencies? What's going to happen if this particular service goes down? So because that's on our roadmap, we want to hear from you what types of overviews you could use today and what you think you're going to need 6 months to a year from now. So, like Vincent said, configuration data management is a thing, and that also doesn't go away if you're just because you're deploying to cloud or just because you're deploying containers. So if you're already using XL Deploy, then you know dictionaries. They allow you to manage pieces of information that tend to vary across environments. So something like a file path that would be slightly different in your dev environment versus test versus production. And dictionaries are great because they're very simple to use, but they're very flexible. So you can use them to share data, or you can use them to isolate data. And they also provide one single place where you can bring together all of that information that you, in the past, might have stored in different types of files. But another trend that I think is even further along the hype cycle is infrastructure as code. So all of that configuration data, you don't just want to store it in a dictionary in XL Deploy. You want to store it in source control alongside your application code. So that way you get a version history, you can roll back changes, and it makes it a little easier to automate the process of keeping this type of data up to date, especially if you're using something like Puppet. But storing configuration data as code is not just great for operations, it's really great for developers. So sometimes developers own pieces of information about that are going to be needed to use in deployment. So this gives them a way to use the tools that they're already using, Git, Subversion, GitHub, but to store this type of data just alongside the code that they're committing every day. And developers are most likely responsible for defining what their deployment packages look like. So if they can also store that in code, then they can just do that right along with committing their source code, and they don't even have to go into a tool like XebiaLabs. So one of the things that we've always heard, and will continue to hear, I'm sure, is that developers don't care about deployment. They just want it to go away. So we want to make it easy because, well, sometimes you do have to do a deployment if you're a developer. So XebiaLabs and XebiaRelease have developer-friendly interfaces like APIs and command line interfaces, but of course they both have graphical user interfaces that users with any type of role can use. And finally, like Vincent mentioned, actually it doesn't, whatever cloud or container or microservices or serverless, however these are affecting your IT strategy, you probably still have some enterprise requirements around security and auditability and reporting. So the XebiaLabs platform uses a role-based security model that integrates with your LDAP and single sign-on systems. So you have full control over who can see what and who can do what. And both tools, both XebiaLabs and XebiaRelease, have detailed logging as well as reports that you can view in the product, or you can export and then import into your favorite data analysis tool. So all these cool new technologies help you automate and deliver faster with less errors, but there are challenges. But what we see is that a lot of those challenges are not that different from the challenges that you had back when you're using WebSphere and JBoss and Tomcat. So all of these cool features in the XebiaLabs platform work really well when you're moving to cloud and container technologies. So what's next? If you visit XebiaLabs.com, you can download case studies and analyst reports. We also have some great white papers. We've got one on Docker that's really interesting. If you don't have any kind of cloud strategy yet, you don't really know where you want to go with it, Gartner and Forrester both have reports you can download that kind of go over the options and the pros and cons of public cloud. I've mentioned a couple of times that we want to hear from you about what you need and what you're going to need in the future, and a great way to share that with us is to join the XebiaLabs user panel. You can sign up at a table in the other building next to where we had lunch. This just makes it a little easier for us to contact you, and we can learn from each other with all these great new technologies. And finally, if you haven't yet, download XebiaLabs and XebiaRelease 7.0. You'll get the Azure plugin, which is brand new. You'll also get a new Docker and AWS plugin, which have been enhanced a lot since version 6.2. And of course, you'll get all the cool new features that are in the products themselves. So that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. So it's kind of pretty quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we want to allow dictionaries to be stored as code in a Groovy file, but actually everything to be stored in a Groovy file. So I think what we hear the most often is that people want to store dictionaries as code, but actually you could also apply the same strategy to all types of configuration items. So we're actually working on that now. That I think we'll be building that through the 7.5 release, piece by piece. But yeah, the idea is that it will be a Groovy file. You'll be able to synchronize that with your repository and update that however often you need to.
Can you just go a little deeper into what the contents of the Groovy file are? Because I'm not familiar with the product, but what kinds of configuration data?
Yeah. So the Groovy file is basically kind of a description of what you would normally store in XebiaLabs. So everything in XebiaLabs is a configuration item with certain properties. So it could be something like a description of a host or of a Docker container or of an application. And then, of course, there are properties depending on what kind of configuration item it is. So this Groovy file would say things like, define host, address is this, username is this, password is this. And then you would be able to synchronize that with XebiaLabs. Yeah, so we went through that same kind of question, Groovy, JSON, YAML, and we ended up on Groovy because it's a programming language instead of just a description language. So you can add some logic in there. So we actually started out with building release templates as code for XL release. And there, you're even more likely, I think, to want to do things like create a release, and for this phase, create five tasks of the manual type, or something like that. Groovy lets you do that. In JSON, you're just literally describing it piece by piece. And Groovy has things like variables and this kind of thing. So it's a little more powerful.
Yeah,
Does that match with your theory?
I'm glad to know somebody else is thinking the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
On that note, with that, are there actual values that are being stored inside of those Groovy files, like replaceable values, things like that, or is it just placeholders?
No. Sorry, what do you mean by replaceable values?
The placeholders for something that will be changing between environments, like a file path that has like difference one place or the other. The dictionary values for those, are those being stored in Groovy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The problem what we see is in order to meet our multitude of PCI requirements, we've got a totally segmented air gap between our dev environment, our QA, and then our staging production, where we've got two instances of XLD and XLR set up.
Oh, okay.
And in order to get things across, it's quite complicated.
Yeah.
So what we end up having to do most times is just manually inputting values in one environment, and then when we have everything all set up, we manually put them in the next environment.
Oh, okay.
So I was wondering if those actual values are being stored in there, then that kind of adds the difficulty of the transferring of those secure values that we're trying to hide.
Yeah.
Are both of the instances connected to the same source code repository?
Yeah.
There's really an air gap.
We build the packages back in our labs environment, and then after we build our packages, we have them scanned, and then we bring them into our production environment.
Scan. Okay.
Like
But actually, like you export the DAR and then move it there. And
Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea is that you can define the dictionaries in a separate file from the package. So you can have like a package definition. You can mix and match whatever way you want, because the boundary between who defines what is different for everybody. So you could say that you could have one DCL file that defines both the package, 5 environments, and all the dictionaries. So you have like full self-service. Or you go with like, I just define the application, somebody else defines the environments. So you could have both of these XLDs attached to their own source code repo. You'd have 2 files. But you still have to find a way to get the values from here to there.
Yeah. I don't think it would help you with your kind of migrating process.
I guess that's by definition or by design that you can't automatically do that.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out how we're going to do that one.
So you'd want to be able to export the dictionaries and then push them in there or something.
We've got some concept ideas that we're working with for the CLI,
Oh, yeah.
but nothing hard concrete yet.
When we come to the user panel, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, definitely.